Είστε προσκεκλημένοι, κυρίες και κύριοι. Όταν αλλάζουν τα γεωπολιτικά συμφέροντα, αλλάζει και η γεωγραφία και η ιστορία. Οι εξελίξεις στην περιοχή τρέχουν. Η γεωπολιτική είναι αυτή που θα καθορίσει το μέλλον και οφείλουμε να προετοιμαστούμε κατάλληλα για να αντεπεξέλθουμε στις απαιτήσεις του μεταβαλλόμενου περιβάλλοντος στο οποίο ζούμε, με τις συνεχώς μετατοπιζόμενες και ευαίσθητες ισορροπίες. Η σωστή αξιοποίηση του φυσικού μας πλούτου έγκυται πέραν από την ορθολογική και έγκαιρη ανάγνωση των ανακαλύψεων στις αποκλειστικές οικονομικές ζώνες της περιοχής, στην αναγνώριση και την αξιοποίηση των δεξιοτήτων και ικανοτήτων των ανθρώπων μας. Η σημερινή διάλεξη του Προέδρου και Διευθύνοντος Σύμβουλου της IFP Training, κ. Jean-Luc Karnik, είναι λοιπόν μια ευκαιρία να αντλήσουμε εμπειρίες και γνώση από έναν επαγγελματία με σημαντική συμβολή στην ανάπτυξη και ανάδειξη των ταλέντων στον τομέα του πετρελαίου και φυσικού αερίου. Για τη σημερινή συνάντηση και την ευκαιρία προβληματισμού και συζήτησης για τις προκλήσεις και τις τρέχουσες εξελίξεις στη βιομηχανία του πετρελαίου και του φυσικού αερίου, εκφράζω τις ευχαριστίες του Πανεπιστημίου στην εταιρεία Hyperion και ειδικά στον Διευθύνοντα Σύμβουλό της, κ. Σημεών Κασιανίδη, που και φέτος για τρίτη φορά χρηματοδοτούν τη διάλεξη Hyperion. Ανυπομονώ και εγώ, όπως και εσείς φαντάζομαι, να ακούσω τι έχει να μοιραστεί μαζί μας ο αποψινός ομιλητής, κ. Jean-Luc Karnik. Σας ευχαριστώ και καλή ακρόαση.
So it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to our third Hyperion lecture at the University of Cyprus, an event which by now we see well on its way on becoming an established institution. 18 months have passed since we held our previous lecture, a period tightly linked with dramatic economic developments in our country and the world at large. For us at Hyperion, this has been a period of refocusing and reinvention. As we saw in the brief video, our group maintains today an active presence in 7 countries with customers on a global basis. Our industry focus is on the hydrocarbons, chemicals, and the power generation industries, and we feel well poised to take advantage of growing opportunities on the global market. Last but not least, we are taking a position in the emerging and much promising Eastern Mediterranean hydrocarbons industry. We launched a relationship with the University of Cyprus in February 2013, a few days before the collapse of the Cyprus banking system and the beginning of what was to be a most challenging and difficult period for our economy. We are confident about the future, and we feel that an important contributor is striving for excellence and achievement in all parts, academic, research, and professional life. We are therefore pleased to award this year's Hyperion Excellence Awards to 2 students from the Science and Engineering departments.
Όπως ακούσατε, η εταιρεία Hyperion, στο πλαίσιο της συνολικής προσφοράς της στο Πανεπιστήμιο Κύπρου, παραχωρεί επιπλέον 2 ετήσια χρηματικά βραβεία αριστείας σε 2 αριστεύσαντες φοιτητές της Σχολής Θετικών και Εφαρμοσμένων Επιστημών και της Πολυτεχνικής Σχολής, που φοιτούν σε τομείς που σχετίζονται με τις δραστηριότητές της. Από τη Σχολή Θετικών και Εφαρμοσμένων Επιστημών καλείται ο κύριος Γεώργιος Αβραάμ, φοιτητής του Τμήματος Μαθηματικών και Στατιστικής, για την απονομή του βραβείου και για μια αναμνηστική φωτογραφία. Συγχαρητήρια. Από την Πολυτεχνική Σχολή καλείται για την απονομή ο κύριος Λούκας Χαραλάμπους, φοιτητής του Τμήματος Πολιτικών Μηχανικών και Μηχανικός Περιβάλλοντος. Συγχαρητήρια. Λίγο πριν η διάλεξη του κυρίου Jean-Luc Karnik, μια σύντομη παρουσίαση του ομιλητή από τον Διευθύνοντα Σύμβουλο της Hyperion, Dr. Κασιανίδη.
For over 3 years now, Jean-Luc is head of IFP Training, one of the true leaders in professional skills development for the oil and gas, both upstream, downstream, petrochemicals, and powertrain industries. He has written numerous books and articles on the oil economy and has been recognized with the distinction of Knight of the Order of Academic Palms and National Order of France for distinguished academics and figures in the world of culture and education. We look forward to listening to his lecture and what he has to say about the development of the petroleum industry in Cyprus with the current and projected global energy outlook. Without further delay, I call Jean-Luc to the stage.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to be here. It's a great pleasure also to see that the amphitheater is full. Thank you for your presence. The topic of my speech tonight will be about the development of the petroleum industry in Cyprus. So let's be clear from the beginning, I'm not a specialist of the Levant Basin. So what I'll try is to share my experience with you concerning first the situation of the oil and gas market today. We are going to see that we have gone from scarcity just a few years ago to abundance today, which helps to explain the present oil prices. Then we're going to discuss what it takes to develop a petroleum industry in a country. And then I'm going to try to answer a question, is oil a curse or a blessing? So let's start. What is the global petroleum context? So first thing to have in mind is that oil, of course, has a calorific value. That's the reason why you put oil or gasoline in your car. But one of our predecessors at IFP, Mr. André Giraud, who used to be later Minister of Industry, then Minister of Defense, he said, of course, oil has a calorific value, but it has more than that. It has a very strong geopolitical power. Here we can see the impact on the finance of a country. Oil represents today 10% of all the goods traded in the international market. You can see if it is working. Is it working? Here, you can see that the imports of energy represent between 20 and 40% of all the imported goods in different continents. So it's something very, very important which has a huge impact on the macroeconomy of each country. So I'm not going to develop more. I think you all know the importance of oil in the international trade. On this chart, you can see the evolution of the consumption of primary energy worldwide. So it's the whole world, it's primary energy, so it means that coal can be converted into electricity, of course, and gas also. But here you can see the share of coal, of oil, of gas, of hydro and nuclear, and the beginning of the rise of the new renewables like solar and wind. So what we can see here is that year after year, the world is demanding more energy. It is due to the growing population. It's also due to the standard of living. In many countries, people want to live like us in Europe. They want to have cars, they want to take planes, and therefore, despite here you have the first oil shock, the second oil shock, the Asian crisis, the financial crisis. Despite all these events, demand for energy is growing. So on one hand, it is good news. It means that wealth is spreading across the world. On the other hand, because of the weight of fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas represent much more than 80% of the total energy needs, it means more and more CO2 emissions. And you know that it's a big concern today. So why is oil the first fuel today? The answer is quite easy. Oil is liquid. As a liquid, it's very easy to store, to handle, to use, much more than gas. In 1 cubic meter of oil, you have 1,000 times the calorific value of 1 cubic meter of gas. So let's see now the evolution of every energy source, and you can see that over the last decade, the fastest growing energy source hasn't been wind, solar, nuclear, gas, oil, it has been coal. So coal mainly in China with huge development of coal power plants. You can see the beginning of a rise of renewables, a phenomenon which is due to continue, of course. Here you have the evolution of the oil price. So I started in the business some 35 years ago. I already witnessed 4 countershocks. The first one was in 85, 86, when the Saudis decided to change their policy, to abandon the policy aiming at giving a given price of oil and wanting to protect their market share. At this time, the Minister of Oil of Saudi Arabia used to saying, the Stone Age didn't end because of a lack of stone. And so maybe one day the oil age will not end because of a lack of oil. So we have to be very, very careful. Then we had the Asian crisis at the end of the 90s, with oil again, which dropped to $10 per barrel. It was a nightmare for the industry. Then recently, with the demise of Lehman Brothers and the financial crisis, for a very short period, oil prices went down from 100, almost 50, to 35. But they recovered very, very quickly. So the industry over the last decade has enjoyed very high prices and has been getting used to high prices. Today, the situation, as you know, prices dropped from $110 per barrel to something like 45. It's a nightmare for the industry. Service companies are firing tens of thousands of people right now. The big companies are striving to survive, and they're going to survive. I'll come back to that later. Here, you can see one explanation of this big change. The real game changer has been in the United States the rise of the shale gas. So shale gas is here on the bottom, and shale oil is on the top. Today, with the revolution of shale gas, the United States not only don't have to import gas, but they're going to export in form of LNG, liquefied natural gas. Concerning oil, which has started some 5 years ago, over this period of 5 years, the production of shale oil in the United States represents 5 million barrels per day. It means that the total increase in demand for oil over the 5 last years has been covered by the shale oil from the United States. If we compare the situation here in green, the drop of price 6-7 years ago during the financial crisis and the very quick recovery, because at this time, curve in green, the OPEC countries decided to put forward a policy of quotas in order to increase the prices, and it worked very well. The difference with the situation today here in black is that the Saudis are no longer prepared to play the role of swing producer. Saudis, they have oil for a century, as they want to be sure they still will have outlets for the oil in the coming decades. I'm quoting here the Minister of Oil of Saudi Arabia, Mr. Al-Naimi, who said, "It is not the role of Saudi Arabia or certain other OPEC nations to subsidize higher cost producers by ceding market share." So today, very clearly, Saudi Arabia, along with the Middle Eastern producers, they want to protect their market share, and they're ready to have a very low oil price in order to discourage producers in other places. So this is the situation for gas. Because, you know, in the Levant Basin, there is more gas than oil. So it's important also to talk a little bit about gas. So a couple of years ago, in 2008, the situation which is shown here is what was forecasted in 2008. So what was forecasted was a steady rise in demand for gas in the United States on the left-hand side, and with an increasing import of LNG. At the same time, the domestic production in Europe was due to decrease, consumption was due to increase, and very heavy imports of LNG. And in Asia, the same situation, strong increase and strong increase of LNG. So these were the forecasts. What happened? In the United States, what happened is that demand increased more, and production increased dramatically due to the shale gas. So in this case, the United States don't have to import, and they have still a lot of gas for future exports. In Europe, it's a totally different situation. Consumption of gas decreased steadily. This is a tragedy. In Europe today, we import and use a lot of coal because coal is cheap, and we have a lot of power plants fired by gas which are idle. And this is entirely due to the fact that coal is so much cheaper than gas, and there is today no tax on CO2 emissions, or the tax of the price of CO2 is very, very low. In Asia, the situation was almost as forecasted, with a steady growth even higher. Fukushima disaster helps to explain, because Japan shifted from nuclear to gas. So if I summarize, the reality is that North America is self-sufficient and able to export. Europe doesn't need as much gas as was forecasted. And in Asia, you have the main market today. So let's focus a little bit on the demand of gas. As you can see in Japan, most of the gas is for electricity generation. Electricity generation in the aftermath, of course, of Fukushima. In EU, you can see it's well balanced, with a part for electricity generation, a part for industry, and a part for residential and commercial sector. In the US, a very big portion is for electricity generation. Gas today is so cheap that it has displaced coal. Coal is being exported to Europe, and especially to Germany, because coal is cheap. And gas is much cheaper in the United States now than coal. So if we look at the situation of the gas market in the world, you can see that almost all LNG are exported to Asia, here in orange. Almost all the pipe gas is from Russia to Western Europe. And here in the middle, in the Atlantic Ocean, or what is called here the Atlantis market, it's a totally disappeared continent. There is no gas traded in the Atlantic market, so far. In the coming years, we will have LNG coming from the United States, going to Europe or to other parts of the world. So now have a look at the situation in your region. On this chart, you can see an estimation of the level of gas resources. So I must be very clear, a gas resource is not a gas reserve. Reserve is something which is proven. A resource is something which is estimated. So according to USGS, you have 3,400 gigacubic meters. So that's a lot of gas, which normally should be found. Now, concerning reserves, you know that there have been big discoveries in Israel, in Cyprus, and very recently in Egypt. You can see the figures. The figures are quite impressive. Hundreds of billions of cubic meters. So there is a lot of gas now. And the big question mark is what will happen with this gas. I suppose we are going to discuss this later during the Q&A session. So gas of course, is the preferred fuel today for electricity generation. So that's one possibility. Second possibility is to export gas to given markets. The problem is that the gas industry is a very long journey. If you find oil, you can develop it in a couple of years, and then you sell it on the international market. When you have an oil discovery, you do not bother what you are going to do with oil. You know there will be a market for oil. For gas, it's a totally opposite situation. When you have gas, 30 years ago, it was a catastrophe. Nobody wanted gas because there was too much everywhere. Today, it's no longer a catastrophe. The big international oil companies, when you look at their portfolio, they have approximately half oil, half gas. But when you have a gas discovery, the main question is, what are you going to do with the gas? Where is the market? And as I tried to show you, the European market for gas has been in a big downturn quite recently. So exports. And then, of course, you have other options, and options which are studied right now in your country concerning, for instance, the transformation into petrochemical products. I'm not going to discuss it more. I will leave it for the questions later on. So here, it's not only the present situation is what can be forecasted up to 2030. Of course, all forecasts are wrong. And forecasts are especially wrong when we talk about prices. Nobody knows what will be the price tomorrow, in 1 month, in 1 year. It's impossible. And very often, forecasting are self-destroying. If everybody believes oil will be scarce, everybody will invest because prices will be high. And while investing, the supply will increase. And at the same time, everybody wants to save energy, to have better energy efficiency, and demand will go down. And at the end of the day, prices will go down. So self-destroying predictions are very, very common in our industry. What is important to keep in mind here is that demand for energy is going to grow, and mainly in non-OECD countries. In OECD countries, population is no longer growing. We are concerned about energy efficiency, about greenhouse gases, CO2 emissions. Growth will be coming from non-OECD countries, which will try to catch up with us. Now, concerning the different sectors, you can see that power generation is going to grow incredibly. But everything is growing, even the transportation sector. We had a discussion with the rector this afternoon about the transportation sector, which is relying today 97% of the energy used for cars, boats, planes, trucks is liquids coming from oil. So there is a total monopoly, and a monopoly which is difficult to break. Of course, gas will be more used in the transportation sector. One day electricity, maybe hydrogen, but you have to generate hydrogen. So it's not an easy situation. And here, I try to show the sources of energy which we will be relying on. And for instance, if you take oil, normally demand for oil is supposed to increase. And here, the downward curve here is what will happen with the depletion of the existing field. You know maybe that when you have an existing field, if you do nothing, year after year you produce less because the pressure in the field declines. And so every year, just to keep steady the production, you have to invest to balance this 5% decline. And you can see that over almost 2 decades, you have to replace, to invest, to explore, to develop, to produce 5 times Saudi Arabia. So that's a tremendous number. The same for gas. For gas also you have depletion. It's a slow pace, but you have depletion. And in the coming decades, we will have to replace a lot of gas, the equivalent of 5 times Russia. So this means the future for gas in this region can be bright. So, who are the main players and what are the strategies today? So here you have the two biggest players, Gazprom from Russia and Saudi Aramco from Saudi Arabia, who are producing more than 10 million barrels equivalent oil per day. Then you have big companies. You have one international oil company, the biggest, ExxonMobil, and you have Rosneft, PetroChina, and NIOC from Iran. Then you have a bunch of national or international oil companies. Among them, you have Total, of course, you have Shell, Chevron, BP, Petroleum de Venezuela, Statoil from Norway, and so on and so on. And then you have a lot of other players. I'm not going to develop everything. What are the strategies of these companies today? They are facing a very tough situation, especially in the exploration production sector. So let's talk very quickly, because the big IOCs, they're integrated. They are producing oil, but also refining and selling, even involved in the petrochemical business. Today, these companies are making, let's say, fortunes in the refining and petrochemical sector. But they are losing money in the upstream because of the low oil prices. All these companies were developing very expensive oil fields, deep offshore, unconventional, Arctic, which are very expensive. And during the last decade, because of there was easy money, there was a lot of money, the price of all the oil services skyrocketed. So today the concern of all the operators is to decrease the costs, to make sure that discovery, which was profitable at 80 2 years ago, will be profitable next year at 60 or 50. They are reducing capital expenditure, and my guess is that in the coming month, the sales period will be opening. I don't refer to the Christmas season or the after Christmas season. I'm referring to the fact that a lot of small players are going to lose their shirt and are going to be on the market. And the big players with beautiful balance sheets are going to buy. There will be a new concentration in the sector. It already started in the service sector with Halliburton and the merge with Baker Hughes, with Schlumberger and Cameron, etc., etc. Shell and BG, and much more will come in the coming month. So I'm going to, with this last slide, to end my first part. What I would like you to keep in mind is that not so long ago, until last year, the paradigm was as follows. Oil and gas are rare. Demand is going to increase, and so price will increase. It was the common sense 1-2 years ago. Countries, of course, are kings in this case. They can increase the fiscal regimes, the fiscal terms, and ask more taxes, more royalties from the companies. Production costs will increase because easy oil is now in the hands of the OPEC countries, and the big companies will have to find difficult oil, deep offshore, unconventional, Arctic, etc., etc. The oil and gas services will be more expensive. There will be more dependence on OPEC countries. And the last point concerns the producing countries, in which very often the price of petroleum products is very low. In some countries, you can get a full tank of gasoline for less than the price of a bottle of water here in Cyprus. So, of course, in this case, there is people are not. There is not a lot of energy efficiency. So what could be the situation tomorrow? What I'm talking here is not a probable scenario, but a possible scenario. The possible scenario is that we will have peak demand at the horizon, that due to the development of renewables, due to the concern about CO2 emissions, in maybe, let's say, 2 decades, which is very short frame for the energy scene, demand will peak and go down. In this case, there will be maybe peak demand before peak oil. If you remember, not so long ago, a lot of people were saying, we are running out of oil, there will not be enough. I remember when I entered the industry, I was told there are 30 years of reserves. 35 years later, I'm told there are 45 years for oil and 60 for gas. So again, Sheikh Yamani used to saying, the Stone Age didn't end because of a lack of stone. Maybe it will be the same for oil. In this case, of course, small independent players who have developed the shale and the oil, the shale gas and the shale oil revolution in the US will be able to travel abroad and to repeat the success in different countries. Producers in this case will have to compete in order to attract investors. Oil and gas exporters need cash. So it means they will have to increase the taxes on the local products. And the oil price is no longer driven by scarcity, but by the marginal price. So I'm totally unable to tell you whose scenario will occur in the future. The only thing I know is that we are living in a cyclical industry. We are now in a downturn, and we have to prepare for an upturn which is going to come. I don't know if it's 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years, but it will come again. So let's switch now to the second part of my speech. So first thing I would like you to keep in mind the main difference between oil and gas. I already told you that oil is a liquid, and therefore oil is very easy to handle. The concentration is very high, the energy density is wonderful. So for oil, it's a wonder. For gas, it's a nightmare, because the energy density is low, and because gas is gaseous, it is difficult, very difficult and expensive to store, and even to transport. Of course, you can put gas in a pipeline, but you have to have big compressors. You can liquefy at minus 162 degrees. It's awfully expensive. So the gas industry is highly capital intensive, and that's the main difference with oil. Okay, first thing. Second thing, when you have gas, what can you do? I already told you. First thing, you can put it in a network, and then you have gas for the population. But it takes decades to build a network. I remember, maybe I'm too young, between quotes, in the 50s, when gas was discovered in Europe, it took decades to develop networks. And even today, you don't have gas everywhere, because networks are expensive. You can, of course, extract liquids. If you're lucky to have wet gas with condensates and LPG, you extract the liquids and you sell them on the market. Unfortunately, in the Levant Basin, it's mainly dry gas. Then you can treat the gas and put it into an LNG plant on an LNG carrier and across the oceans to the end of the world. It's a very, very expensive business. And then you can convert it either, here I have GTL, gas to liquid. My friend Simeon would advocate for methanol to olefin. So you can transform the gas into petrochemical feedstocks. So now take a look at this slide in which I try to show what is a petroleum game. Starting with the exploration phase, the field development phase, field operation, and the field abandonment. Here we are mainly in this region in the exploration phase, where companies are willing to invest hundreds of millions in order to drill wells and to see if there is oil or gas in the underground. Because the fact it is offshore, deep offshore, a single well costs more than $100 million. Other parts in the world, it's even worse than that. And you must keep in mind that on average, one exploratory well out of 4 1 out of 4 is a success. So it means if you want to enter this game, you must have a very wonderful balance sheet and a lot of cash and ready to take a lot of risks. So first thing which happens, first thing which happens, the first critical decision here on the top is, do I enter a permit or not? Because if I enter a permit, I will have to make a lot of studies, geology, geophysics, drilling, and you know you are going to spend a couple of hundreds of $millions without any certainty of finding something. Then, if you find something, the second critical decision will be, do I develop or not? And how do I develop, of course? Then when you produce, the critical question will happen here when there is a decline. Do I stop or do I redevelop the field? So this is mainly the big petroleum game. So what are the benefits if something is produced in a given country? So I tried to distinguish the direct impacts and the induced impacts. The direct impacts are very easy. Companies are going to spend money, capital expenditure, operating expenditure. It means salaries for people, taxes for the state. You can have royalties, you can have a corporate tax. So this is money which will benefit to the country, to the citizens of the country. And then you have a lot of induced impacts. For instance, right now, because gas is so cheap in the United States, people, they can buy the gas at a minimal price. It means they can buy much more, or they can spend their money and buy, I don't know, computers or iPads or what else. The businesses are very competitive. Gas is so cheap today in the United States that you have lots of petrochemical projects. So this is good for the business, but it's also good for the people, because at one day you need people to run a business. You will have investments, you will have also cheaper electricity, so you have a lot of induced impacts when you are producing oil or gas. So this is a slide showing the different specialities you're relying on when you want to develop a petroleum industry. As you can see, you have many, many different specialities. I just want to give you an example. In Norway, which is a small country, 4 to 5 million inhabitants, not so much bigger than Cyprus, oil and gas represent 25% of our GDP. Can you imagine 25%? I will talk about Norway a little bit later, very shortly. But jobs in the petroleum sector represent only 3% of the workforce. So the energy business, and especially the petroleum business, is very capital intensive. It generates a lot of cash, but employs very few people. Few, but qualified people. So I'm not going to discuss everything. We could spend the whole night about it. What is important to keep in mind that if these are skilled jobs, it's not only jobs at the managerial level or for graduate engineers. You also have a lot of jobs for operators or maintenance technicians. And these people are really in charge of the operation. What I would like you to keep in mind is when you take an Airbus 380 or Boeing Dreamliner, you are comfortable because you know the pilot has been well educated, is trained and retrained every year. What you don't know is that in an oil refinery or an oil production system, an oil FPSO, you have more control loops, more automation than in a Boeing or an Airbus. And the guy who is running the unit is normally a guy who has less than a BSc and is not necessarily trained and retrained every year. So there is a big skills challenge in this industry. So what lessons can we keep in mind if we look at other countries. So the first country I wanted to refer to is the Netherlands. So Netherlands discovered the gas of Groningen in 1959. It was Shell with Exxon at the time, Shell and Esso. And very quickly after the discovery and the start of the production, Netherlands had a lot of trouble, economic trouble. They had inflation, they had unemployment, they had a lot of troubles. And everybody was trying to understand why. How is it possible? And later on, in 1977, The Economist, the newspaper The Economist, coined the phrase, the Dutch disease. What happened? That oil and gas production meant a lot of revenues. These revenues were translated into an inflated currency. At the time, it was the guilder. So the exchange rate, as compared to the other currencies, increased very quickly. So all the other sectors, apart from oil and gas, had a big loss of competitiveness. And these other sectors employed a lot of people. Loss of competitiveness meant a loss of market share and at the end of the day, unemployment. I don't know if I'm clear, but it's a macroeconomic, I'm not a macroeconomist, but there are maybe in the room here, that's something which may happen even in a country like Cyprus, who has a fixed currency, the euro, because more resource, at the end of the day you have more foreign currency, which you will transform into local currency, you will have more money in circulation and more inflation. So this is a phenomenon which is well known today. So second example I wanted to discuss is the oil curse. So I'm not going to refer to a given country because all these countries we're working in. So I don't want my clients to be unhappy because I quoted such country in Africa, in Latin America, in the Middle East. But we all know that, let's say on the risky side, if you have oil and gas, it is easy money. It's not easy money for everybody. You have service companies who have to work, oil companies have to work, but very often for the state, it is a windfall profit. It's money coming from the sky, and a lot of money. And with easy money, unfortunately, very often there is bad governance. There is mismanagement, there is waste, there is even corruption. You just have to open the newspaper. Every month you can see a case of corruption in these kind of countries. So the biggest problem arises not from the fact that you have oil and gas, but because it is not well used. It's a problem of governance, it's a problem of mismanagement. So here it is written that some 20 years ago, some American economists found that countries with a lot of resources and exporting raw material had a worse performance, economic performance than the other countries, which is also a kind of paradox, because normally if you are blessed with a lot of resources, you should have more growth, which is often not the case. But oil, or a resource, let's say, can also be a blessing, because if you have oil and if you use it in a good and intelligent way, I will give you the example of Norway in a minute, but let's take the United States. Due to the shale gas revolution, gas is very, very, very cheap. It's good news for the people, it's good news for the industry. All the energy-intensive energies are coming back to the United States. In the United States, the petrochemical industry is more competitive than the petrochemical industry in the Middle East. So it's a wonder for the country. What else? More gas, less coal. That's wonderful for the planet. Less CO2. The best in class over the last 5 years has been the United States, not Europe. When you have windfall coming from taxes or cheap energy, it means you can invest this for education, for research, and research in different energies, renewables, for instance. So, of course, oil is not necessarily a curse or a blessing. It's up to what you're doing with it. So it's very important to have the right institutions. Okay, let's take the Norwegian example. So on this slide, you have on the left-hand side the oil production in red, and on the right-hand side, the gas production in blue. You see that the gas production is still rising, whereas oil production is going down. So everything started with the Ekofisk discovery in '69. So it's 50 years ago, or 45 years ago. You see that in 90, a petroleum fund was created in order to take part of the money to invest it for the future generation. The idea is not to dilapidate all the revenue coming from the oil and from the gas for the present generation, but to keep some for the future generation. Today, last year, I'm sorry, it's not updated. Last year, the value of this fund was above $850 billion. So if you divide it by 4 or 5 million inhabitants, you can see that per capita, you have almost $200,000. It is in dollars. So what happened is that Norway was able not only to create petroleum company, national petroleum company, Statoil, but also to develop a service sector. And the service sector in Norway employs 80,000 people. That's not a big number. It is not a big number as compared to the working population. But these people are highly qualified, and you know that wages in the industry are quite high. So a last word about my country. When I talk abroad, I always like to emphasize the French paradox. In my country, we do have a petroleum industry with service companies. Schlumberger, for instance, has its roots in France, like CGG, Total, I suppose everybody knows. Technip was created by IFP some 50 years ago. So you have a whole bunch of companies working in the oil, gas, and service sector. But we have no oil, we have no gas. So it means that a country can develop an oil industry even without the resource. On the other hand, you can have the resource and be enabled to develop an industry. So, must be cautious. So, a word about IFP. IFP is mainly a research institution, or what I would say an innovation institution, created just after the Second World War, with the objective to develop people, what I call talent and technologies. Talent and technologies. And if you want to develop a petroleum industry, you have to invest in talent and technology. That's absolutely unavoidable. So throughout the years, IFP created commercial entities. The most well-known is Technip. More recently, IFP Training, the company I'm leading now. And just to finish, to show you that at IFP, we are carrying out industry research, not theoretical and fundamental research. But 10 years ago, one of our colleagues, Yves Chauvin, got the Nobel Prize in chemistry, and his invention had led not only to the Nobel Prize, but also to refining processes which are used still today. So I would like to thank you for your attention. I hope I've not been too long, and I would be glad to answer your questions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Karnik, for an interesting lecture. The Vice President of Hyperion System Engineering will now coordinate the Q&A session.
I would also like to thank you for a very interesting presentation and open the field for questions. Gary.
Okay. At the beginning, describe the North American shale oil market as the new swing producer for crude oil. And I'm wondering if you see it that way yourself. Once the price of oil begins to go back up, will the shale producers that have been forced to close because of the prices come back into production and basically move up and down during the course of the next few years regarding, you know, where the price of oil might be? I mean, do you see it like that as well?
Okay, thank you for your question. The big difference between shale oil and conventional oil is that for shale oil, you have to invest, because the duration of one well is very short. So you produce very quickly, and then you have a very strong depletion. So you have to drill thousands of wells. So what does it mean? It means when the price goes down, you have less money, you drill less, you try to drill where it is the most productive, of course. And as soon as the price increases, you can invest more. It's totally different with a deep offshore development, for instance. Once you've developed an offshore oil field, you have invested billions or tens of billions of dollars, so you're going to produce whatever happens. So with the shale oil and the shale gas, it's a very short-term reaction. If prices go down, you produce normally less, you invest less, and when prices go up, you have more money and you invest more. So that's normally what should happen. So what are we witnessing today with the decrease in the oil prices? First thing, during the first year, almost nothing happened. Production is still, as you have seen, was still increasing. This is partly due to the fact that these companies, which are small companies, are hedging. It means that they are selling forward, they sold at a high price a year and a half ago, and there is still a big incentive to keep on producing. But what will happen in the coming month is that there is no longer a hedge at a high price, and that production is predicted to go down. So is shale oil going to be the swing producer rather than Saudi Arabia? I don't know. I cannot answer this question. In the coming month, what is sure, everybody will look at the situation in the United States. Because one thing is very important to keep in mind, that the technological progress is working very well in this shale oil or shale gas revolution. The productivity of the drillers is wonderful. They're able to drill twice as fast as 3 or 4 years ago. The fracking are much more efficient. So the prices also for oil field services are much lower. So the efficiency of the system is improving. So it is very important. One thing is that it will be difficult to duplicate the success in the United States to other countries. And as you look at the situation today, there is no other country with the same story with the shale gas or shale oil than the United States. It's not the case in China, it's not the case in Europe. My country, we don't want, we don't know, and we don't want to know. And it's a political opposition to the shale gas. In many countries, you don't have the same ecosystem which is very favorable in the United States. Another thing is that in the United States, when you own the land, you own also the resource below the land. So I know a lot of people who make a lot of money in the United States because they are blessed with the resource below the land. It's not the case. When you have a piece of land and the resource, you have the nightmare and not the blessing.
Yeah.
Sorry, it was a little bit long.
But from a technological standpoint, do you think that this progressed technology in shale can be exported?
Yeah, technology can be exported. What cannot be exported is the ownership of a resource. What cannot be exported is the ecosystem. If in the United States, when you want a well, You have it in 2 days.
Yeah.
Here, or in France, or I don't know where, in Kazakhstan. You want a well, you have to book years in advance, and you don't have ecosystem. And in the United States, you have pipes everywhere. It's not the case in Europe. So you don't have the same favorable environment. And people who have studied the situation think that even if there is shale, oil shale, gas shale, it will be much more expensive elsewhere than in the United States.
Yes, please.
Since your lecture is on developing the petroleum industry in Cyprus, I guess personally I don't have an answer if it's yes or no. And I would like to ask you a specific question, knowing that in Cyprus we import all our fuel and we spend a lot of money. So the current technology, ETL, do you think is appropriate for Cyprus? That's one out of many, many questions that probably we have concerning the development of the petroleum industry in Cyprus. So could you give us, based on your experience?
So first, is it a curse or a blessing? I would say it is up to you. You have everything to make it a blessing, because if you substitute the current fuel oil, which is used to generate electricity, by gas, it's a winning situation for everybody. It will be cheaper, less currency fleeing out of the country, cleaner fuel, cleaner atmosphere. So it's better for everybody. So now coming to the GTL, GTL is a dream. There are 2 countries with GTL processes now in the world. One is South Africa, and it was due to the fact that during a long time there was the apartheid and they weren't able to import oil. And the other country is Qatar. But Qatar have the biggest gas field in the world. I haven't made the calculations, but it's maybe 100 times the size of the Aphrodite field, so it's big. They have a lot of gas. They don't know what to do with all the gas. And Shell, because it's a private company, Shell decided and convinced the Qatari authorities to build a GTL plant. If my memory is good, the cost, it was 10 years ago, was $18 billion. I don't think this will be repeated, and what you must keep in mind is that the gas at the gate of the plant is at 50 cents per million BTU. So the gas is for free. So if you have the gas for free, and if you have 20 billion, because I think it will be a little bit more expensive today, you can consider GTL. It's not for Cyprus, definitely.
It's a non-starter.
If I can have a short time to continue on that point, I'm not saying that we should convert all the Aphrodites or even other wells in GTL, but just for our fuel needs, is it profitable compared to importing the fuel to build a small GTL unit, according to the economics, according to your knowledge?
Frankly speaking, I'm not the specialist of GTL. What I know is that in our industry, economies of scale are very important. It means that if you double the size of a unit, you do not double the investment. So the smaller the unit, the more expensive per unit. So normally in the gas business, everybody wants to pool the resource, everybody wants to join resources, to have a big LNG plant, to have a big whatever you want, but the bigger the better. I know that for some people, especially for students, small is beautiful. I'm used to saying that quick is beautiful, but in the gas business, definitely big is beautiful.
Big is necessary. Yes, please, Andy.
I have a few questions about the energy dependence of the European Union and the talk about using the Eastern Mediterranean as the hub of the alternative hub versus the Russian supplies into Europe right now. As you may be well known, Israel, Egypt, and small Cyprus, we have decent amounts of natural resources, maybe a little bit of gas as well. For sure, we have gas liquids. But the question is, how do you distribute it? We are in the Mediterranean, and there is no pipeline Eastern Corridor or East Mediterranean Corridor that we can supply into Europe. There has been projects of FLNG floating liquefaction plants in the Caribbean. One is being delivered now, and one in the Asia markets with Prelude. And I was wondering, and your expert advice would be, a combination of compressed natural gas and FLNG could be the way forward for our remote location, or a pipeline straight to Egypt or into another market would be more competitive for the years down to come.
Thank you. I would be happy to have the answers to your question. I really would be happy. What I can say is that gas, as I told you, is a long journey. It will not be done overnight. It will take decades. Today, the situation in Europe is not very favorable because of the decline in gas consumption. One thing is sure, is that the indigenous production in Europe will decrease. That's quite easy to understand. Production from Algeria is also due to decrease, because maybe not the production, but the exports, because the local demand is increasing very quickly. Russia is in a big trouble today. I'm not sure they're able to invest enough to bring additional gas to the Western Europe. So one day in the future, there will be room for gas coming from the Levant Basin. That's the thing. So in the short term, there are two existing LNG plants which are idle in Egypt. I think it's a capacity of a little bit above 12 million tons per year. So the first best idea, of course, is to use the existing facility to export LNG. First thing. So then FLNG, yes, I know, Technip is the leader in FLNG. There are 3 projects in the world. 2 are being built by Technip, one in Australia, Prelude, and the other one in Malaysia. It's expensive. It is expensive. And the price of gas in Europe is not as high as in the Asian market. You must keep in mind that in the United States, the price of gas is close to $2.5 billion per million BTU. Forget the unit, it's a little bit strange, but 2.5. In Europe, it's between 6 and 8, according to the season. And in Asia, nobody knows, it's 10, it used to be 15. But you can see there is no single gas market. There is no world gas market. You have regional markets. And unfortunately, the price of gas in this region is not as high as in Asia. So FLNG, so far, today, I don't think is an option.
For these prices, for these levels of
In this
prices.
situation, yes.
How about the CNG that's come down in 2016?
There's been a lot of talk in this country about CNG as an alternative to LNG.
Yeah. I suppose that you have experts in the room who can talk better than I could about this topic.
Would not like to
No,
comment.
you have so many options. When you have gas, excuse me, when you have gas, you have a lot of options. You have direct route, you have LNG, you have chemical conversion, GTL of course, but you can also transform into fertilizer. You have a route to transform it into olefins. So everything has to be checked, to be calculated. And at the end of the day, somebody has to put a bunch of money on the table. And you know, you have private investors, or some of them will be ready to put hundreds of millions, maybe billions, and they will be very cautious. So I'm from the academic world, so I can have ideas, but I'm not an investor. Sorry.
What about the pipeline to Europe?
It would make sense. You already have pipes through Europe, but then the geopolitics and geography, they compete. Normally, the easiest way to reach Europe would be through Turkey. Sorry?
Suppose the question is to take the pipeline through Crete.
Through Crete, yeah.
And then to Peloponnese.
Yeah, it's an alternative. I don't know the price of this alternative,
Very expensive.
but I think it's going to be very expensive, because right now you have several pipes crossing the Mediterranean Sea, from Algeria, Morocco to Spain, Algeria to Sicily and Italy. So it's not a technological issue. From a technological point of view, it is possible. It's an economical issue and maybe a geopolitical in the case of Turkey.
Yeah. Other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you. You mentioned that France has an oil industry without having the resource. So in a way, it's irrelevant the question whether we have enough or we don't have enough. So what made France have an oil industry? Is it IFP, or what can trigger in Cyprus an oil industry even if we don't have enough of the resource?
Well, first, it is Total. First, it is Total, because Total was created in the 20s, 24, if I remember well, so 90 years ago. Total was a partner in what is called Iraq today, and it's been a success story for both Total and Shell, and later on the two companies merged. We had some oil and gas. We had the Lac reservoir in the southwestern part of France, which has produced a lot of gas, and which has helped to develop a network and a gas industry in France. So the situation was better in the early days than today. And once you have the technology, when you have the people, if you're not able, it's the same for my company. We are a small company. We are 300 employees working in IFP training. I'm sorry, I don't want to make too much advertising for my company, but just for you to understand. 10 years ago, we were very French and very downstream, so very exposed in the refining sector. And we wanted to be more international and more upstream. And today, the downstream part in France represents 10% of our business. So the opportunity for us was to be able to develop in Saudi Arabia, in Africa, in Latin America, and we would be dead today if we hadn't progressed as we did. So sometimes when you are a local player, you are very, very dependent on the local issues and problems. So sometimes the answer is to get international. And all the companies which were on my slide, they are all international companies. They have less than 1% of the business in France. So if Cyprus wants to build a service sector and a petroleum or gas industry, it has to be competitive at the international stage. And if it is competitive, it means it will go out of the country. And that's a good situation. And I can see there are some students in the room. For the students wanting to enter this industry, what they must keep in mind is that it is an international industry. Projects are big, projects are wonderful, but it's international. If you don't want to leave your island, don't enter this industry. Another maybe word for the students is that I'm surprised nobody told me that oil is a nightmare, is polluting the world, corrupting the world, and oil is a curse. What I can tell you is that all the disciplines, all the technologies, all the skills which are developed in the petroleum sector are very useful in the other energy-related fields. Energy efficiency, for instance, is a must today. Renewable energy, especially in the field of biomass or biofuels also. So the skills which are needed in the petroleum industry one day will be very useful to get rid of oil and gas, but this is not for tomorrow.
Volkswagen is taking care of that.
We have time for another one, maybe two questions. Anyway. Angela.
Looking at the current gas prices, and taking into consideration the cost structure of the Cyprus gas, say, sitting at a depth of 5 kilometers, and also the cost structure of the labor cost in Cyprus and all that. Does it still make sense to explore the Cyprus gas or not?
To exploit.
To explore, yeah.
To exploit or to explore?
No.
Exploration was
Have an
done.
upstream,
We know it's done there.
yeah, have an upstream industry.
It's not a question for me, I'm sorry, because I don't have the figures, I'm not the operator. So in the room there are companies who are exploring. You have to be bolder to explore than to exploit, because when you exploit, it means you already have a discovery. So, and the more risky part is exploration. So today, companies are exploring, so it means that they believe there is a potential. And once a discovery has been made, appraisal will be made. And at the end of the day, companies, today, frankly speaking, companies are postponing a lot of projects. Frankly speaking. In the world, I don't refer to the Levant Basin or to Cyprus, but because of the squeeze, the costs of projects are still too high and the prices are too low. So what will happen? If everybody acts like that, it will mean that in a couple of years, there will be less supply, and because of low prices, more demand, and prices will skyrocket again. I've been through 4 cycles. So I think that before I'm going to retire, I will witness a 5th one. So, and in this case, of course, it's better to launch. You have to be very bold to launch a project when the price is low, expecting higher price. Very bold. But I remember it's publicly known. Total, for instance, decided at the end of the 90s to develop the extra heavy oil fields in the Orinoco region in Venezuela. The price, I remember, was far below $15 per barrel. So, okay, some companies are, that's the beauty of the game. It's an open game, you have hundreds of companies, and what's also very beautiful, that small players, companies like Noble is small as compared to ExxonMobil, small players also can play. So,
but it's still expensive.
I'm not from Normandy, but you know, in Normandy we always say maybe yes, maybe not. So difficult to answer your question. But some companies are still believing and investing, even in today's environment. Thank you.
Okay, so our sincere thanks for delivering this year's lecture. It's been a privilege and an honor. Thank you on behalf of Hyperion Systems Engineering, and thank you on behalf of the audience. We will hold the reception outside at the atrium. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming here tonight.